Welcome to the YouTube channel for the Scallywags. We're Skagit Valley College. We are training electricians and mechanics, training here at our facility for boat owners. This was the free talk we did about lithium batteries at the Seattle Boat Show. It has lots of things about mostly drop-ins, but risk assessment, ABYC standard, favorite WS500 voltage regulator, designing systems that work, how do we charge these batteries, things like that. So check it out. If you enjoy it, throw a comment down below. This is our Scallywag Day. We've got some of my students out here in the audience. This is when the college comes down. We like Doggy Day, so we all come down and check out the booths and the products and all the fun stuff. I'm Michael Beemer. We're going to chat about drop-in lithium batteries mostly, and I'll give you a little bit of some history and things that I know. I did this talk last year, and the message was to wait, and I'll probably give some more of that waiting again this year. But just a quick, how many of you have lithium batteries already? Just one, couple. And how many of you are thinking about switching like in the next year or so? So a good chunk of us. Okay. Some of my thoughts are I've actually talked a lot of people out of lithium versus in. And that's just because there's a lot of things that we know already, and there's unknowns, and some of it's the upfront cost, and for whatever reason. Hopefully I can help leave a little bit of time at the end to answer a few questions for you. So I teach at Skagit Valley College, primary electrical instructor, but we're training technicians, electricians and mechanics, and it's super fun. That's the Black Pearl. I let students come down on this, and we use it for systems and exploring and fun stuff like that. And so I love cruising just between here and Alaska, so I don't have any experience in Mexico or anything like that. I am always doing research and following and trying to figure out what's going on in the battery world. It's just one of my passions and one of my hobbies. We started the Scallywags YouTube channel, so there's a lot of tech tips and good information, and you can follow along on projects. We're going to be electrifying one of our school boats, and in the future we've got a couple of big, one of the colleagues who teaches is doing some big lithium installs right now, and we're going to try and document some of that. And so because a lot of you just want to know what's going on out there and get some research, so that's our job. Also, the college would be worth keeping an eye on, and we do workshops sometimes. We're going to try and do a electric boat thing sometime next year where we can just have a bunch of people come and talk about electrifying boats. So basically today, what is this drop-ins and the limitations, risks, options for designing systems that work, that we've found, and stuff like that. And back to my first statement, what about lead? We now have mastered lead technology where we can get 8 to 10 years out of it. It's 99% recyclable. Nigel Calder wrote an article. I was shocked they actually published it about the lithium not being recyclable really at all yet, and the rare metals, and on and on and on. It was in Professional Boat Builder magazine. And so, but it's to the point now where the benefits are huge. I have lithium that I've been playing with in my lab, all sorts of different batteries, and of course cell phones and the car industry and the whole thing. So it's awesome. Most of the claims from all the manufacturers are true. We're getting a lot of energy density, a lot of cycle life, number of cycles, all of these big benefits. Lithium has high charge discharge rates, depending on, we'll get into a little bit of that today as much as I can, depends on your system. And then basically overall lower cost, if we are getting the cycles that they say. With my technicians, I know that the boat yards are charging you about $2 a minute for a technician's time. If you're paying somebody to swap out batteries, and the lithiums go 2 or 3 times and you save all that money in between, the actual amortized cost might be just fine. My caveat to that is I've noticed that nobody really keeps boats more than about 5 to 8 years on average. It's a bigger boat, it's a different boat. And so if you're buying batteries that are going to supposedly last 10, 15 years, you might just be helping out the next person that's going to own your boat. And so that's another question that goes into this whole idea. And of course the cost is just better and better every year with the actual cost. And so, and technology is changing. We're getting into all of the drop-in lithiums that I know of. Basically, we're talking about lithium iron phosphate batteries. The lithium metal batteries are the ones that are, getting a little bit on the scary side of things. And when I was in Houston at the Electric Boat Show, they've got companies now that are manufacturing these batteries that have twice as much storage as the iron phosphate batteries do. And they say that they're safe now, and they've cracked that nut. So who knows? Every year it seems to be getting a lot more stuff. So essentially it is complicated with lithium, and meaning you have to have a battery management system, because basically lithium needs a babysitter, is the way I look at it. You got to balance your cells, you've got to watch temperatures, you got to do a whole bunch of different parameters, and that's what the battery management system is. It just keeps an eye on the battery. Lead is awesome. Lead self-regulates itself. It'll self-balance the cells out. If you put two batteries together and one of them's at 25% state of charge and one of them's at 100, and you turn on your boat, the alternator will feed the dead one. It's got lower resistance. It'll bring it up, and it doesn't need anything fancy. But lithium definitely needs something fancy. And now that's how we get into kind of our risk assessment and our batteries, because once the BMX does detect a problem, we're going to have to deal with that. And as boaters, that can be complicated. So what's my risk? Now, if it's a trolling motor, and it goes offline, I don't care. If I'm sailing to Hawaii and I lose my house battery bank, that's a bigger deal, right? And so, the risk assessment thing is out there, and every boat is different, every boat owner, and how you're going to use your batteries. So there is new lithium standard that finally came out, E13, and I can't get into what all of it is, I'll tell you, but there's some key points that are driving what's happening in the battery world.
Does it also deal with cooling as far as how cold the lithium can be? Like if you were in Alaska?
No, the ABYC standard doesn't deal with temperature range. They're relying, ABYC is mostly about the safety of it, and then the battery manufacturers are the ones that are going to tell us what's the lower limit that we can operate those on, what is the upper limit that we can operate these on. And so that is really more up to the manufacturer. What ABYC wants to have, and the big one is, they want communications, and they want an early warning system for the operator, because if you are coming in, in the dark, shooting the entrance of a marina, you don't want your boat to go dead and black and lose all your electricity, right? We would like to have some notice. Lead was fine. If you ran your batteries to 11 volts or whatever, the lights might get a little dim, but you're still going to get to port if you're abusing them. If your battery management system says, oh no, you are too low, and shuts you off, that's a big safety concern. And so one of the standards really does specify that we need to have that communication to the boat owner. And so that's a big part of it. On the Scallywag channel, some former students took 3 battle-borne batteries and did some real-world testing, and they bought them full price. And it doesn't matter, I just wanted to see at brand X, but they took these batteries regularly down to 20% and 10% until the batteries shut off. They went from Anacortes to Alaska to Mexico, and after a year, they threw them in their van and brought them back up to the shop, and we put them on a true load machine, and they tested still at 100% after a solid year of full-time cruising. And so that was pretty fun. And so that says that we're getting there on the technology. And what did they learn? One of the problems with their older system was they had no communications. They got 3 of these batteries, and one of them goes offline, but it's in a house bank. So how do you know? Well, they didn't. And so, and if it's a warranty, sure, they'll replace it, but it's hard to do that in Mexico. And so
we're still learning a lot. ABYC sent out this in September. It was a common sense thing, but what I really liked was they got a bunch of lithium manufacturers to give them a bunch of products. They did it in Annapolis in the hot of the summer, and they tried everything they could do to make these batteries just burst into flames. And they found out they could not start a fire. It just didn't work. And so the ABYC was like, that's good news for us. Like we think that maybe the manufacturers are starting to get it dialed in. We're getting things figured out. So that was encouraging for us. Myself, however, I had no trouble lighting the lab on fire a couple of times. And so I'm thinking that ABYC should get a hold of me because I am much more successful at lighting lithium on fire. Now, why did this happen? By the way, the fire department is really scared when you have an 80-pound battery on fire and you tell them it's lithium. They're like, yep, that's your problem, Beemer. See you later. And so, but this was just the BMS was not communicating to a disconnect switch. And if the BMS is saying stop charging and you don't stop charging, it's a real deal. They will light up like a tiki torch. We're learning a lot. And so that's one of the fun things I did. So essentially for drop-in, almost every manufacturer is now making what we're calling a drop-in battery. And a drop-in is what we're been explaining. It doesn't really matter the size. It just means that everything is in the box. It's got the integrated battery management system. And they do typically a very good job with that battery. And they can manage it. But as I said, first of all, boats are complex. And we're trying to crack a lot of different nuts that fit. And in the boat world, it's different if you're going out like the previous guy, salmon fishing for a day, and you just need to keep that chirp transducer powered up, versus me, and I want to go to Desolation Sound and shut the engine off for a week, and I want the fridge to stay cold. I want cold beer, and I don't want my salad to spoil, and so I want energy that's going to do that. And so it's just different. So communications to me is a must, and that's with ABYC's standard. And right now, a quick poll, I think maybe half or less of the batteries actually have some sort of communications, okay? And most of them are adding Bluetooth. And so that's one of the things that I would get right away, because I wouldn't buy like what Mackin had a problem with was I got these 3 batteries in a house bank and one of them goes offline. So if you get at least a minimum of a Bluetooth link so you can get into that battery and know what is its state of charge, is it getting hot, and so on and so forth. The better systems that you get, the better communications they will have. Some of them will actually talk to other batteries in the bank and they will act as a big house bank. And so that's what I would recommend, is you for sure get down in and check out how can I interact with those batteries. So just because it's drop-in doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work. One of the things I seriously would steer you to is Rod Collins has got a great website, Marine How To. He's got about a 20-page article with pictures and stuff like this. And so when you're doing research, and he goes into depth about some of the stuff that we'll brush on, like how much current. My good friend Art, he's coined the idea that lithium batteries is just lightning in a box, okay? And he knows that because he's shorted out several of these. And what he's learned is, as a technician, don't be talking to anybody when you're doing some significant work with great big battery banks. And so, anyways, Rod did a great job about documenting lots of this stuff that's out there. And so the biggest issues that I think we have outside of the communications part is also the amount of current. And so if you can communicate with your batteries, that's good. A lot of them, most of your things that you're going to click on the internet and buy are limited to maybe 100 amps on the charge or discharge thing. I think they need a little bit of oil. And so the battery management system, the way they balance cells and the way they do all this stuff is the contactors in there have a limit of current, which is always far below what the batteries will produce. And so what that means is that, often it's a 100 amp limit. Maybe you could get 200 amps. Your big systems that they install on these giant yachts have like 500 amp contactors and stuff. Lithium does not make good engine start batteries. It does not make good bow thruster batteries. Anything that's got a high current load for short periods of time is difficult to do with lithium. So what that means now is we're starting to mix, right, lithium and lead. Now, when you mix those, you should never, tie them together. There's crackpots on the internet that do that too. You don't want to mix your battery chemistries. So typically we're going to be driving a house battery bank that is our lithium, and we're going to use lead for the other stuff. Now, you can potentially find batteries that'll maybe start your Honda outboard motor and work for both. They're out there, but do your research. One of the disadvantages to a drop-in is once something goes wrong and it shuts off, then it's done. There's a $1,000 battery or more. We can't open it up. We can't work on it. So if you put a 200 amp load on it, and so for example, your engine start battery is low and your engine's not starting, and you go, well, I got an emergency parallel switch. I'm just going to combine it with my lithium house batteries and get it started up. Well, guess what? If you do that and hit the starter on your Yanmar and it pulls 300 or 400 amps and you fry the BMS, those batteries go offline. There's no fixing them. And so there's some real cautions that we have to do when we start mixing these up on our boat. So let's find out, how much current will it do? The other thing is, you were asking about Alaska and temperature. You do not want, the lithium's got a very high low temperature, meaning if it's below 40 degrees, 35 degrees, whatever it is, they don't want you charging those batteries. And they don't want you discharging those batteries necessarily. And so, how are we going to deal with that? The East Coast, they pull every boat out, in Michigan where I grew up, it freezes. They put all these boats up on the beach. What do you do with the batteries? Okay, you got to babysit them. Do you take them home, put them in the warm garage? Now, if you're not using them, it's okay, but has anybody ever heard of a boat sinking on land, filling with rainwater? So if you're going to leave it on, what if the bilge pump turns on and sticks? Okay, lithium, if you discharge it too far, it will not recharge. And so it's great because the lead manufacturers have been lying to us for all these years about the capacity that they have. They say it's a 200 amp hour battery, but really you can use 100 of it if you're lucky, or 80. Lithium, when they say you can use 100 amp hours, it's true, you can use 100. They're relying on the babysitter, right, to say this is as low as the battery can get. We're not gonna play anymore. And so when that happens, though, this is why we don't have lithium batteries at Marine Tech that we use for students. If you take that battery that's dead and send it out into the shop, storage building, and forget about it, the battery management system is still using energy. So if you don't recharge that, it takes the lithium battery down too low, you'll never recharge it again. So now you've got another $1,000 brick that's dead, that you can't do anything with, okay? Now, the communications piece is key. A lot of the batteries will now tell you, you're at 20%, it'll send you an alert. You're at 10%, it'll send you an alert. Make sure that if you're investing a lot of money in lithium, that you have that capability where you can monitor what percent state of charge the batteries are at, okay? Because trust me, you don't want to let them sit around dead. I've chopped up a bunch of them, different brands, and I found it interesting though, most of them that I chopped up, only a quarter of the battery was actually dead. That would short out and would go too low, and then the rest of them would sit and be okay. Okay, once you chop it open, you got a bunch of little cells. I don't know what you do with them now, but it's definitely a thing. And these the ones that we pulled out were unattended on a boat, and somebody left a light on or whatever, it went down till the BMS opened up and said, you're done. But then it just sat there, and the battery management system is doing its job. It's babysitting. It's checking cell temperatures, right? It's looking, it's trying, and then pretty soon there's no juice left for it to do that job. Okay, so the benefits, or a little bit about the integrated or external BMSs. So without going into a 2 or 3 hour lecture, when it's integrated in a little drop-in package like we're talking about, that's awesome because it's drop-in, it's easier to manage. But you can't work on it. So an external BMS is better on a bigger system because you can work on it, right? You have some interactions with it. And so there's some other things that you will find that that is good or bad. I like a lot of these now, in the marine world especially, I like to have a BMS that's a dual channel. And meaning that you've got a discharge side of the house and a charging side of the house. Most of the batteries up till now are just a single channel. So if it gets too hot on a cell temperature, right, or cells are out of balance, if it's a single channel and it just says stop, everything goes dark. If you have a dual channel, you can have a battery that's running and you are charging it. The BMS might just say, hey, you know what, stop charging. Maybe it got too cold. And it does the stop charging side of the house, but it allows us to continue to use the battery to discharge. And so really, really good stuff. We talked about early warning here, and there's not a lot of companies that are doing this yet, but it is definitely coming out. And then Rod Collins in his articles, the FETs that are in these BMSs are what are limiting our current. And the other thing I forgot to mention too is we talked about crossover, parallel starting. All of those instances are when we usually find out the current limit of our current systems. It's usually not when we're charging, because we don't usually have a big enough charging source, and we usually don't have enough discharge on our boats unless you hook them to thrusters. Now, the big part of what we're finding is these things, the charging systems. We call lithium batteries the alternator killers. And unless you're spending a lot of money on really good alternators, I guarantee you're going to cook your alternator. You go over here to the shore floor, you buy 400 amp hours of drop-in lithium batteries, put them on your sailboat like Cruising Maya did. You got your stock 80 amp Hitachi alternator on your Yanmar, and within a week, it's going to be toast. It's just going to melt. The guts are going to come out of it because lithium has such low resistance that it just takes full charge, and it just runs and runs and runs until it doesn't, okay? Yes. Yes, so the question is, can we use an external regulator on the alternator? And yes, if you go to lithium, that is one of the options. That's a great way to go. And because it'll do temperature compensation. So we want to have something that's looking at our alternator and it is checking the temperature. The problem is with a stock alternator, if you do that, you're going to have to dial it down to about 35 amps in order to keep it cool enough to run continuously. And so usually we want to, when I start talking about lithium, I'm usually roping, I go right past drop-in package that we're talking about today and say you really need a whole integrated system, it turns out. You know, it's not really just dropping in a new battery. Yes. Well, so on your alternator, if you temperature compensate it, it's going to be significantly lower in order to run continuous, to recharge. And so yes, one of the solutions is use, and also we don't want to parallel lithium and lead. And so what really works best, we've found, is to keep the lead-based batteries for thrusters and engine start and stuff. And so if you don't want your alternator to melt, the best thing to do is to put in your lithium house bank and use a DC to DC charger. So we're going to just take power from our start battery or wherever, and if I have an 80 amp alternator, I'm going to make sure that I'm only going to pull 40 amps or something on my DC to DC charger and let it take care of charging, okay? And there's a couple of reasons to do that. Now, if you have a single external BMS and it opens, so if you get a fault and you're running your engine, from back in the old days, we always used to tell everybody, you know, on the 1-2 all switch, don't switch it to off because you'll destroy your alternator. Well, if you've got a lithium battery and you open the contactor because the cell got hot, essentially the same thing happens. When you open the contactor, you're going to blow out all your diodes, you're going to melt your alternator, and that is the least of your worries. We have several claims running around in the insurance world right now. One of them's at 30 grand, the other one's at $120,000 worth of damage, because when you open up, your voltage spikes through the roof. And guess what? That new chart plotter you just bought, it doesn't work at 40 volts, right? All of your electronics and all of this other stuff goes poof. So not only did you, right, ruin your engine alternator because these contactors. Now, if you have a great big boat and you put 9 drop-in batteries, the chance of all 9 of them opening up is very, very small. But if you have the smaller boat, so it comes back to risk, right? Risk assessment. What am I looking at doing? So if you use a DC to DC charger, that's going to be helpful, right? Because you're not going to get a voltage spike. You're not going to ruin your alternator. You're going to be able to leave your existing system the way it is and charge these drop-in lithium batteries. So budget, small battery banks. You're buying a few of these internal BMSs. If they have communications, that's good. I would highly recommend you charge them with a DC to DC charger so that if the BMS says stop charging me and opens up, sure, your boat might go dark, you know, your refrigerator, the beer might start getting warm, but you're not going to damage your alternator and all of your electronics and stuff like this. It's a thing. We've covered cold weather. Shore power charging gets to be another issue. And I was just discussing earlier before the show, research says that it's actually not ideal to leave lithium batteries fully charged. If you've got a Tesla, I'm a teacher salary person and I own a boat, so there's no way I can afford a Tesla. They have my doctor brother-in-law, he's got one. You know, it's got a range extender button, and the computer inside the Tesla, they only plug it in like once a week. They want to keep it in that middle range. They don't want it too low, but they don't want it full. And if he's going to go from Medford to Portland, he pushes the range extender button and it gives it, quote, 100%. My iPhone doesn't fully charge till 4:30 in the morning because it knows my patterns. And so where are we at with the batteries in our boats? There are almost none that I know of charging systems that will leave your batteries sit at, say, 60% or 70%. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I want to go boating. You know, I'll get up my phone and text the boat and tell it to charge the batteries all the way up. Right? We don't have that yet. There are some systems. You can go in and program some of the battery chargers to go to 80%, but there's no easy interface for a boat owner then to say, well, just kidding about 80%. Now I'm really ready to go boating, you know? And so, yes, that's right. Great question. Yes, exactly. So we don't know the long term. And for most of us, we don't care, right? If it's 3,000 cycles and I'm only ever going to use 2,000 cycles, leave it sit at 100% all the time. What's the harm, you know? Here's the problem. You buy a used boat, it's got lithium. We have no idea how it's been taken care of. So it's hard to get a resale value on lithium. Sure, yeah, it depends on your audience. And, you know, they could build this iPhone battery. These things last 2 or 3 years, right? I know they could make it last 8, but that'd be foolish for Apple because then Beemer's not going to buy a new phone, right? So it's how we use them. And yeah, so I don't know that that's a game changer, you know, a stopping point, but it's something to think about. So I leave my lithium batteries, I got a big disconnect switch, and you know, 9 months out of the year when I'm working, I don't get to go out that much, only 1 weekend a month. I just leave the lithium batteries shut off. And then when I get ready to go, I turn them back on. And you know, yes, my wife knows I'm a crackpot because she's like, we ain't gonna ever do 3,000 cycles, so who cares? I don't know. The question was about, are there chemistries that like to be charged all the way to 100%? And I assume there are. I don't know, and how these batteries are built. We also are on the fringes of different types of lithium sulfurs and salts and blah, blah. I mean, there's some really cool research happening. We're going to see in the next few years, I'm sure, solid state batteries, which just means you got a solid electrolyte. And then if you have a solid electrolyte, the dendrites and all this other stuff don't become problematic, and we might get even more cycle life. So yeah, it's definitely a thing, and it's worth checking out. It should be okay. Yeah, I don't think that, charging them 100% isn't going to be dangerous to the boat, and they're going to sit there just fine. It's just, would they last longer? And the research is starting to say, yeah, if you keep them not at 100%. Now, you could have your shore power charger go to 75%, and if your engine alternator takes them to 100, by the time you motor up to Susha, they're going to be at 100%, right? And so you could definitely arrange it that way. The other thing is with these big, and we're talking about battery banks now, I mean, we put 900 amp hours of drop-in lithium on a Nordhaven, or on a Northern Marine boat. 9 or 10 of these batteries. When you plug into shore power and you've got these chargers that are running continuously, it's significant. One of the cool things that happened in Houston is there's a new company out of Canada. You're going to start to see new shore power charging cords. They're just starting to do beta testing in marinas, so it's going to be a few years down the road. But we're going to see some new hull inlets that are actually designed that can run 30 amps continuous into our boats to charge our huge battery banks and stuff. And that's my goal, because Roche Harbor still only charged me like $5 for electricity, so I want to go put them, and get like a week's worth of energy out of them and then boogie out of there. Okay, so we're getting some good questions. When you say drop-in, we get a lot of average boat owners and do-it-yourself people that are just dropping in lithium. So reading the directions is super important. When somebody's putting a $70,000 battery bank on their boat, which is one of the current bids that just went out, that's just the batteries, they know the technicians are going to read the instructions, one would think, right? But for us, do it. So watch out for, if you got are you going to have enough current capability to make microwave popcorn? Are you going to have enough, what is the limit of charging? Is it a half C, which is what most of them are? Can it do 50 amps continuous into this battery, or what can it take? So read the directions. If you're using lithium, you have to have a lithium charging profile, obviously. You really want to make sure you're doing that correctly. And like I said, the DC to DC is a good way to do that. And there's other things too, like if you read Battleborn's directions, if you're building a big house battery bank, you have to fully charge each battery first. Because when you go to start landing the cables to parallel them, if one's dead, you could potentially just fry the BMS of the other one and it goes offline. And most of the manufacturers are saying if you're going to use it as a bank, they all need to be within 10 cycles or 50 cycles of each other. You want to do it at the same time. You don't want to have a couple of lithium batteries and go, oh, I use those for 2 years. I really like, 400 amp hours instead of 2, and just throw 2 more in with it. It's not desirable for sure. And there's other things with your battery banks that you can do, that you pretty much want to try and keep cable lengths the same. Overcurrent protection is a big deal. We'll get to that. This is what I was talking about. And by the way, there's a term out there that when I say the BMS disconnects, typically there's a lot of articles, they call that a load dump. I don't know why, it's a term that's stuck. And so if you're reading and you're hearing things, load dump just simply means we've got a fault of some sort and we are opening the contactor, saying we're taking this battery offline. If it's in a bank, just one going open is fine. If you only have 1 or 2 batteries and they open up, that's when it's not going to be fine. And that's where those things really get into, and you've got to evaluate your risk on these things. So there's a lot of things on risk assessment. I talked about like offshore sailors. The old boat, keep it simple. Lithium batteries are far from simple. Peel the top off, look inside and see what the manufacturers have built, and Rod's got all those good pictures. There's a lot of risk assessment people. I like Andy Schell a lot. He and I have done some interviews. John Harries with Attainable Adventure Cruising. These are some great resources if you want to, before you spend your money and you're assessing, is lithium good for me and what I'm doing? They do a fabulous job of covering that. This is the specific language from ABYC about having an early warning before we have a load dump and for communicating, which is out there. And what I've found, so on all of our bigger lithium installs that we've done, there's only one voltage regulator company that manages lithium batteries properly. And because lithium, once again, is not like lead, lithium will take 100% of its whatever you can throw at it for charging right up until it's basically full. And then it wants you to stop and drop down. If you just, all of the existing voltage regulators only worked on time. They would just say do bulk charge for 4 hours. And so they didn't step back. The wake speed, Al, who lives on the neighboring island up by me, he developed wake speed. It looks at current. It actually watches how much current is going into your batteries. And when they start to get full, there will be a little bit of resistance, and he now knows it's full. So he developed the best voltage regulator out there, and then Dragonfly Energy bought it from him because they are the battle-born people, and they said, well, if this is the best voltage regulator, we better get our hands on it. And so, like every other entrepreneur, Al said, well, sure, I'll sell you this technology. Just write the check. But once again, this is getting into that system approach where it's more than just batteries. So keeping it simple, 2 or 3 drop-in batteries and a DC to DC charger on the big side of things. The other thing that wake speed does, I have a math degree, on the temperature profile, it does a fabulous job of noticing that you're getting close to being too hot, and it just tapers it off and holds it, where the other voltage regulator companies drop it in half and they seesaw kind of, and they're less effective. And square wave, on, off. And so wake speed is doing a good job. They told me that now have CAN bus communications, so the batteries can now be able to tell charging sources to stop. They've got that ABYC trigger wire coming out of their batteries. So Battleborn, Dragonfly Energy said, we want to be the ones that are ABYC compliant with early warning before we shut off. Just like last year, wait 3 months because the next generation of their batteries are going to have the communications and the early warning wires and be able to shut things down. Yeah, the prices are, so I don't really get into pricing because it changes so quickly, and the best part about my job is I'm not a salesman. I don't have to sell you anything. I just go boating every summer, and I just teach my students how to, set the right profile on, to charge these batteries. It has come down, but you're right. You generally are going to get what you're paying for, though. Rod Collins has a particular brand that he is dead set against because he's had some bad experiences. So I would be hesitant for sure to buy bargain batteries. The reason that some of them are expensive is because of what they've put into them. And they've mounted them and they've made them robust. And so there's definitely some issues with buying the low-end stuff. Yes. Yeah, so customer service, yeah. They have people that pick up a phone. Yeah, and, bargain batteries on Amazon, Jeff Bezos has got enough money, but they're not going to probably talk to you on the telephone for customer support. The other thing is insurance. So this is a big thing. We do the Alaska seminars and offshore sailing seminars with John Neal, and he's been following the insurance companies. There are insurance companies, the biggest carriers started dropping boats if they had lithium batteries on them. And it's like, whoa, all of a sudden, you should check with your insurance carrier. Now, the good news is I think that's kind of a short-term problem because if the batteries are UL rated, have some sort of a rating, or the insurance companies are saying if you're buying an entire package from somebody, right, where they're selling you not just a battery, it's a battery and it's a charger and it's we're going to dial in these systems, but it's a conversation the last thing you want is to put some of these batteries on your boat and then have a claim and have it denied. And so I would definitely consider the insurance aspect. And by the way, if you are buying cells and buying your own BMS, the insurance companies are not going to cover you, right? If you're just building it yourself, forget about it. Not in the marine world, because you'll get dropped like a hot potato. New York is stopping it with electric bicycles. There you go. Yeah. So buying bargain stuff isn't, and if my bicycle caught fire in my house, probably 2 tiers. But man, if my boat caught fire, holy hell, that's a big deal. Anyways, Lithionics is the only company right now that is UL rated. Lithionics are so safe that the Postal Service will deliver them. They had to give $50,000 worth of batteries to UL and then another $50,000 through the testing, and they destroyed them. It's expensive, but they got some ratings. Anyway, so there's my DC to DC on the low end if you're just going to put in a few batteries. A good alternator is seriously going to run you $2,000 or $3,000. If you want something that will, and I like setting systems up this way. I mean, I want to have 400, 800 amp hours of lithium, and I want to be able to start up the boat and put 200 amps into it for an hour or two when I motor from one island to the next, and then have 3 or 4 days worth of energy. But that does come at a pretty significant cost, and that's the benefit of lithium, is we can throw hundreds of amps at it, I mean, all depends on the size of your bank and the battery management and stuff, but way better than lead. And this is the DC to DC we talked about. You can get up to 60 amps right now through Victron, and I heard that by this summer they'll have 100 amp DC to DC chargers. So if you have a 150 amp alternator on your boat or something and you want to put 100 amps of charge into this lithium bank you're creating, then we should be able to do it. And I don't know what the price point is on these things because I'm not buying them readily, but I'm sure the internet will let you know. Obviously, we talked about lightning in a box. You've got to have super close attention to overcurrent protection if you start dropping these in, especially if you're taking 2 or 3 batteries, 4 or 5 batteries, and making a big house bank. Put a fuse on every one of them. And that's so easy for me to say. If you look at them, most of them require a Class T fuse. Has anybody bought a Class T 300 amp fuse lately? Yeah. $75 fuse or something. So you're buying a $1,000 battery and you're like, oh, I didn't realize the fuse in the holder was going to be another $150. But you've got to stop that lightning in a box in the event of a fault. And so, make sure you're doing that. Make sure, yes. A Class T has 20,000 AIC, amperage interrupt capacity, meaning it'll hold back 20,000 amps worth of stuff without going through it. And that's what you need for lithium. Yeah, the smaller the battery, the less you need. And so, but make sure you're putting, I go on these boats like, you got a couple, 3 or 4 of these, and I just know how much energy they have in them, potentially. So make sure you're following some ABYC standards and you're putting overcurrent protection on them. You want to keep, even though it's lithium, you want to keep if you're having these batteries work as a house bank, make sure that they're all in the same ambient temperature, same location. Don't be mixing up and putting a couple of lithiums in the engine room and saying, oh, I can put 3 more, Battleborns back here in the lazarette or something and hook them all together. And just be mindful of things like that. I already talked about wake speed was awesome. One of the other things that I do, if we do any workshops at the college, which is part of my mission, lithium battery installations, electric boat and stuff like that, the avenue to find out about those things is through cruiserscollege.org. It's weekend programming that we do, and you can get on a listserv. I send out 1 email a month, but that way you can get notified if the college is putting on. We're trying to do workshops and stuff other than just these little presentations at the Seattle Boat Show. So follow along. There's also some free things like this battery swap guide, which I've put together for some of my technicians with tips about when you take the cables off to put a tie wrap on there and to remember to do this and that and things. We've put out some quick reference guides or something we're building that I just like to share with boat owners. And so do-it-yourself kind of people. So I got just another 5 minutes maybe before the next presentation. If anybody has any questions I didn't answer, yes? No. So if the BMS just shuts off because of, say, a high temperature, when it cools off, the BMS will go back, okay? Right. And same thing with low voltage, if it doesn't go too low. If it goes down and shuts off and opens up, you put a charge back on it within a reasonable period of time, it'll charge back up. You just can't leave them set for a couple of months if you've run them dead, because then you're at risk of not getting them to recharge again. A couple weeks would probably be fine. Yeah, I don't know what the long term is, but you just want to be mindful of that. Thank you. Endorsement for taking classes at the school.
I would really like to emphasize over current protection.
Another vote over current protection. Oh man, I've done it. I've caught so much stuff on fire. The wake speed is the wake speed WS500 is the alternator voltage regulator that is the cream of the crop. It's what handles everything. It's a little computer. It's easy to program. I'm a huge fan of it. No, so the wake speed is for your engine-driven alternators, charging sources. The DC to a DC is just a standalone battery charger, but instead of plugging into shore power, it takes existing battery power and converts it. So a DC to DC charger, basically you're charging, on my boat I got a Yanmar with a 100 amp alternator. It's charging the start battery bank. The DC to DC will allow me to take a group of whatever, Battleborns, and it'll take power from here and do the 3-stage charging, do the right profile, no matter what it has on this side. You could have 12 volts on this side. It will make 14.4 on this side. And so it is essentially a charge. And then, of course, because it's pulling power out of this battery over here, the lead battery, the alternator just keeps replenishing that lead battery. And so it makes a system, it's your interface that will allow you to charge lithium properly without doing a massive amount of re-engineering. Sure, so you have a ACR, which is the way all of our boats have been set up, and essentially when the start battery gets full, it closes the contact, charges the house batteries. When you put in lithium over here, you don't want an ACR because now you're paralleling lithium and lead, so you have to take and disable or disconnect that ACR and you put in a DC to DC charger. I think I'm gonna have to wrap this up to let the next presenter start. So thanks for coming. Check out our YouTube channel and the website. We'll do more classes for you.